My name is Britney Cole, and today we're going to talk about shifting from helping your teams go from order takers to learning innovators and design thinkers. A little bit about me: I'm the Director of Learning Experience and Innovation at GP Strategies, and I've had the privilege of working across a variety of industries, from sales to manufacturing to pharmaceutical to telecom, whether that's in learning where I've been for the past 12 years, or in sales, or even inside a steel mill as a previous engineer. And with this varied experience, it's really helped me develop an empathetic state of mind for the people who are doing this from day to day. And so I'd like to bring a lot of that experience to this conversation. So let's start. As you think about your role as a learning leader, you're hearing a lot of requests come in from your business partners. And some of them seem extremely tactical and maybe even sometimes off the wall. So for instance, you might hear this woman and she's going to say, "We're not getting the results we need." And she's identifying for you that you need training. And that training is the output of what she feels is the gap in her business. You might hear more of the buzzwords, where it might be somebody who saw a webinar or read an article and he says you need some micro-learning. Or it might be this guy and he's saying you need a video or infographics, and he's telling you exactly what is needed. And you're thinking, well, maybe that's not the right approach. Or you might hear, again, the buzzword of let's make this experiential. And so you're getting these requests, your learning teams are getting these requests, and maybe even on no budget. So you might hear this guy to say, "Hey, I saw this commercial, can we do that?" And you might be thinking, well, that's not even realistic. But as you get these requests, the learning teams that you lead are meant to react tactically to the different requests. So if the business partner says they need training, we loop up, we get together, we identify the need, and we build courses. And as a result, we're building stuff, and potentially we're building capability, but we might not be building business results. So all of these things that we're creating as a result of our requests from our business partners, there's this really rocky path from the thing, the video, the training, the instructor-led class, to actually meaningful results that can drive organizational success. We also, as learning professionals, we want to do a good job, right? Our learning professionals work with these business partners day to day. They build good rapport, and to build trust, you have to execute. But we're also expected in that particular role to be a lot of different roles to all different people. And so we see a lot of learning professionals really juggling everything from performance consultant to content developer, all the way to facilitator and administrator. And you can probably imagine that these individuals can't do it all well. They might have one or two key capabilities that are their strengths, right? I have learning individuals on my team who are great project managers, and they can bring a project from ideation all the way through execution. But they might not be the strongest content developer, so while they can execute, the output might not be as viable as if I had a specialist in that particular role. Another thing that we catch ourselves doing is we take ourselves way too seriously, and we get distracted by those bright and shiny objects. Just like as the business partners come to us and ask for micro-learning or animations or videos, we too tend to want to do these learning trends that we're seeing in different webinars and different articles. Clint Clarkson is an animator I particularly appreciate, and over the past 5 years, you're seeing the same trends over and over: micro-learning, augmented reality, virtual reality, gamification. And we talk about these topics at a really high level, but we're not really getting into what's driving why we're using those technologies. And a lot of it gets lost in the shuffle. So we might build a gamification platform, but what ends up happening is we have some great leaderboards and badges, but we're still not seeing the results. We're not seeing the increased sales. We're not seeing the reduced average handling time of our call center employees. So what do? How do we influence our business partners and build that strong rapport, but still be strategic? And most importantly, still deliver. Typically, when the business comes to us, you all well know, they're already on a timeline. They've probably committed to their business partners, and we're just one cog in that larger machine. So how do we push back but still move forward? And that really starts with making some critical mind shifts. So as we think about what learning and development and training has been for the past several years, it's a course mentality. We're focused on content. Training becomes this event, whether that's a classroom training like an instructor-led course, whether it's a virtual training or even an e-learning. It's something that pulls you outside of the work to go do something, to go learn something, and then ideally come back with some new knowledge and skills to apply on the job. As a result of that mentality, employees tend to wait for development, and the leaders, their managers, send their people to training. That's a big paradox shift to more of the on-the-job mentality, where employees learn and they grow by doing, not by knowing. So it becomes from a focus of content to a focus on action. And training could be an event, but it's a part of a bigger process in which they're gaining skills potentially over the course of time, and they're not just going to a learning course, but they might be doing on-the-job shadowing with a peer or a mentor. They might be having coaching conversations with their manager. They might be doing other informal type training that's curated from a learning technology platform that's embedded into your process. By flipping that mentality from a course mentality to an on-the-job mentality, development of an employee tends to be a little bit more self-initiated. You're empowering and you're putting ownership on the employee versus the organization to send people to training. So as we see that mind shift, there's three things that are happening that I want to summarize for you. First, it's going from efficiency to efficacy. And you'll notice that by the results that you tend to measure. If you're measuring compliance and the number of butts in seats, that's efficiency. Efficacy is, did it make an impact? Do people feel more confident? Are you seeing those business results? We're also changing from learning objectives to performance objectives. So when you see an e-learning course in the beginning, at the end of this course, you'll be able to, that could be a performance objective. More likely it's a learning objective. So again, it's walking away from the content, even though that's what we build and what's most important to many of us. It's moving to a performance and an outcome state of mind, which we'll talk about here in just a bit. We're also changing the mentality from events and the content itself to building things within the workflow. So when people need that training, when they need that help, when they need that performance support, they can do so at the moment of need. So you might be thinking, well, that sounds great. How do we do that? How do I empower our learning teams to actually take that approach? And it's really what I mentioned before, the ability to put yourself in the learner's shoes and approach training requests, which are still going to happen, for more of a consultative and empathetic state of mind. But also think of some really creative stuff that we can build along the way that's going to engage and motivate and inspire your learning teams. So when we think about the individuals on your team, what I tend to measure is not just their resume, not just their experience of whether they were an instructional designer or a facilitator or a project manager, but really this cadre of qualities and traits that we're starting to recruit for. And it's going from that consultative, strategic, you can almost see the Swiss Army knife here on the screen, where it's becoming this creative problem solver. So training could be an output of a particular request, but it might not necessarily be the only thing, or it might not be the thing at all. We're also trying to encourage our teams to take more of a performance outcomes focus. And so at a high level, when you think about performance outcomes, there's on the larger side of the circle, it's what do people know? And knowledge is important. And in theory, right, from a training event perspective, when you go from knowledge, you gain that knowledge and then you can do something. So maybe you're doing something better, you're following the call flow process, you're able to install something more efficiently. But then when you think about a performance outcome, it's actually what are you producing? What are those job relevant accomplishments that are happening as a result of what that employee knows and what that employee does? As a result of following the call flow, the individual is able to have more sales, or customers who talk to this particular call center agent are having better net promoter scores. And so it's the outcome, it's what the production of work is. And that's really, when we think about building a learner-centric intervention, that's the focus. And one of the ways to build that focus is using a design thinking method. So design thinking has been really pervasive in learning across all design industries. And it's not necessarily anything that's disruptive, but it's a focus, it's a methodology, a problem-solving approach on action. So instead of going for the waterfall process where we go from design to development, where we have an alpha to a beta to a gold, and then measuring to see if that gold course was effective or efficient, it's breaking the process down into smaller stages where you can, again, start with what you're trying to define and who you're trying to solve for, but then you're ideating a lot of solutions. And this is problematic for a lot of learning teams because sometimes the ideation phase is counterintuitive to what they know or what they're comfortable with or what your budget even allows. But this ideation phase is going to be really key, and we're going to talk through how you do that shortly. And then it allows you to prototype initiatives faster. So that all hinges on one statement. It's called the how might we statement. If you can help your teams approach problems using this particular statement as the means in which they approach the conversation, you're going to automatically drive empathy, and you're going to help your teams and thus your business partners really open their minds to something more than I need training. So let's walk through a quick 5-step process of what might that look like. So step 1 in the design thinking process is empathize. And really that's about having your teams, your learning people, talk to their people. And when I say their people, I don't mean the business partner. I mean the person who's receiving that intervention. That's the end learner. One of my colleagues, she works a lot with call centers, and I've been using that analogy quite a bit. And she has a really close rapport with her business partner. And I asked her, I said, when was the last time you talked to the learner? She's like, oh, last week. And I said, oh, you were talking to one of the agents? She's like, no, the call center director. And I said, no, what about the actual employee? She's like, and she couldn't remember when. It probably was 6, 9, maybe 12 months ago. And so we're getting the feedback through a filter. And so really we need to take a step back and actually talk to the people who are receiving our interventions, even if that's a course or a training, and learn about what they do. What are their challenges? What makes employees that are great so great? What's that secret sauce? And why are low performers struggling? So again, this is part of that analysis, but when you do it with an empathetic state of mind through interviewing, through talking, through learning about what these people are going through on a day-to-day basis, what their workflow looks like, you start to identify some aha moments of what are some interventions that can help elevate the game. We're not going to go into a lot of detail on learner matrix and persona statements, but when you start to interview and really empathize with your audience, you're going to be able to chart the types of roles. So maybe that's having a matrix of people of tenure versus performance. Maybe you're talking about new hire versus incumbents, but you're breaking down your audience into smaller chunks because the interventions you might apply to new hires are going to be different from incumbents. Or the interventions you might recommend for high performers may be different than those who are struggling. So let's assume that you know and your learning teams are able to understand who their learner is. The next step is actually defining the problem you want to solve. A lot of times what's happening is the business partner is telling us what that problem is. So we're making a lot of assumptions that the business partner knows. And they probably know a component of the problem, but what's the actual thing we're trying to solve for? So for instance, what you're going to see on the screen is the same problem defined differently. A business partner might come to one of your learning professionals and says, we have to retrain because salespeople aren't getting the explicit customer approval when they're walking through the sales process. Whereas, that might be the owner of the customer approval process. The call center director might say, well, I don't have time for people to get off the floor to go do training. So it's the same problem, but it has a different lens. And then the end learner says, I know exactly what to do. It's not a training issue, but it takes too long, and I'm losing customers and not selling. So when you think about a complex problem, you could say, oh yes, we're going to build you a course, and we're going to reiterate all the points that you learned last year in your training. But by doing that again, you're not going to solve the core issue. And so how you can help your learning teams really reframe that is through building what's called a point of view statement. And you can do that in a couple different ways. I'm giving you one here on the screen. So when we think about this issue I just broke down, salespeople are frustrated because of a lengthy customer approval process. That's the core issue. They still need a way to provide a great customer experience and not let the current process get in the way. But the current process might have some compliance and regulatory components around it. And so these how might we statements actually allow for the ability to ideate and think through solutions. How might we get customer approval to make the process easier and faster but still stay compliant? How can we help salespeople understand that approval is actually a key part of the overall customer experience? And how do we as learning professionals support that so it doesn't take them away from their job? Because that's what the call center director is concerned about. So it's breaking that problem into 3 statements. And when you do that, you can actually start to ideate and think through solutions, right? This is that brainstorming phase where you're thinking big. And often we constrain ourselves because our teams might only know a couple options because that's what they're comfortable building, but really there's so much to choose from. And really it's a part of a larger journey. And that's when you start to say, how can we empower our learners to learn more, get their toolbox a little bit bigger? So as you consider, as you shift from this mindset of order taking to say, yes, I'm going to build you a course, to more of a innovative and design thinking state of mind, this isn't simple. This is not necessarily going to change overnight. Putting a design thinking class for your team isn't going to change behavior, but it's also looking at who you're hiring. We're again looking at that framework, that Swiss Army knife. You might have people with big ideas, but they lack the ability to execute. Or you might have people who deliver without even pushing back. They might have great rapport with the business, but they're still building content that's ineffective. So what are you rewarding as a learning leader? Execution or business results? It's also not status quo. People are still going to offer and build what they know and what they're comfortable with. So you have to give teams the space to think, what can they really do? And take the budgetary restrictions away. I know that that's going to always come back to say, well, we don't have the budget to build an augmented reality system with a device. But when you think about creating the ability to allow people to ideate, even though that might come up as an idea, if you filter it through a performance outcome lens, the end countermeasure, the end learning activity or solution might be more at a scaled pace. But when you take things off the table initially, you're never going to have that ability to actually push your teams into offering something that's going to make a difference. And it's also okay to be tactical. We want our teams to be strategic, and we want our teams to think more consultative, but we also need to give them useful and practical tools. And using design thinking activities and approaches, not just with you and your teams, but also taking that with the learning professionals and implementing that with their business partners, you're going to be able to get closer to operationalizing the strategy and showing the business results that you want to show. Thank you so much for your time. I'm really excited to be here today. Talk soon.